Off we go. Let's talk about dealing with criticism so that you can be you. And I'm not talking about dealing with criticism by way of hiding from critics or fighting critics. To me, that's actually being controlled by critics and the criticism. It's you engaging with them. No, I'm talking about dealing with criticism so you can simply be you without apologizing for it. I believe that you have an immense beauty inside of you that wants to express itself. I think that's something that we all have, be it expressed through your art, your self-expression, or you just simply having your authentic voice. I think these self-expressions are what give us the true satisfaction in life that can only come from inside, that we can't find outside. Yet why do we strangulate these truly satisfying gifts that want to come through us? Because we fear criticism. When we're fearing criticism, it means we're really dishonoring ourselves and we're praising the critics. I mean, we're literally killing our self-expression in order to avoid the critical voices that are around us or the critical voices that we fear may come towards us if we truly express ourselves and the beauty that wants to live inside of us. There was an interesting video by Prince E. It hit me. He said something very inspiring, which was, no one has ever erected a statue of a critic, period. Why haven't they ever erected a statue of a critic? Because what critics have to say simply doesn't matter. It is absolutely useless and meaningless to us. I think they matter as people, but what they have to say absolutely doesn't matter. So let's stop dishonoring ourselves. Let's stop praising the critics and start honoring thyself by learning how to deal with criticism effectively. So here are my 5 insights to help you deal with criticism so that you can honor yourself. First, consider the insight of acclamation. Before you put yourself out there initially, whatever that means to you, we feel this intensity of trepidation, fear of, oh my gosh, what will happen when I put myself out there? And it's almost just overwhelming. We say, I couldn't possibly bear living with this long term. Well, we acclimate. We have to go into the intensity, and then we actually acclimate to it. It's just like how athletes will go to a higher elevation to acclimate themselves to oxygen deprivation. It actually helps them perform better. So you and I have to first step into that trepidation before we can become acclimated to it and actually become functional in it. And before too long, just like the athlete who's been training at higher elevation, we feel actually relatively comfortable and we can start expressing ourselves much easier with more grace. And then the insight of the inner critic. I believe the strongest, most punishing fist of criticism always comes from inside of our own head. It certainly always appears that the biggest critics are out there, and there are critics out there, yet the most vile critic is always the one inside of our own head. I believe our inner critic is very critical because it's afraid of failing, and it's very critical because it wants to hold us back from experiencing a greater fear, which is our own magnificence. So our inner critic tries to cut us down. Now, our job isn't to criticize our inner critic. Our job is to realize I too am a human. My inner critic will be along for the ride. Just like a child throwing a temper tantrum, we keep going anyway, even though we know the inner critic will throw its temper tantrum. Next insight, consider that critics are always projecting themselves onto you. So when external critics come at us, it sure appears as though they're criticizing us. But what I'd invite you to become acutely aware of is they are absolutely not criticizing you. Their words are pointed at you, yet their words are always talking about themselves. They're projecting how they criticize themselves onto you. You know, the inner critic inside of these external critics, the people out there, they have their own inner critic. And that critic, it's got like a sharp knife in its hand, and it wants to criticize it. It just wants to stab. And the inner critic will stab. And in order for that person to escape the pain of stabbing themselves, criticizing their own self, if they can point the blade at you or someone else and stab at you, it helps them kind of hit the relief valve so they don't feel as stabbed by their own critical blade. They are always talking about themselves while their words are pointed at you. And the insight that critics are always scared people and they're always hiding. When a critic sees you do something that they're either afraid to do or they believe they can't do, they want to cut you down. And of course, they do that through their criticism. If they didn't do that, they would have to sit there and truly behold the magnificence that you're expressing. And because they repress their magnificence, they'd sit there feeling pretty inadequate. To them, it would appear, you're doing something I can't do. It makes me feel pretty inadequate, kind of afraid. No, instead of actually connecting to that vulnerability of their own inadequacy, they're going to try and cut you down because they are absolutely afraid. And of course, they want to stay in the power role of giving the criticism so that they don't have to be in the vulnerable, courageous role of being the one who's actually on the playing field of life, who has the potential to actually receive criticism. So the critic will always hide. They'll watch people on the playing field of life while they're sitting 50 rows up in the stands, never touching the field. A quick note, a little bit of an interesting experiment I've been running the past few months. When I get critical negative comments on YouTube videos, which are fine, I never delete negative comments. I'm not trying to hide or combat with them. Yet I always look to correlate how much these criticizers hide. So I'll look at the negative comments, then I'll click on their profile to see how many subscribers they have, how many videos they have. In other words, how much they're putting themselves out there being on the actual playing field of life, or are they sitting 50 rows up in the stands? And I find 98% of the time they're sitting 50 rows up in the stands. So actually, grab my trusty computer, free advertisement for Apple here. I just want to read you a couple of quick examples of negative comments and then correlating to how much these people, these criticizers, don't put themselves out there. And I'm not trying to criticize them. I'm just wanting to illustrate the point for you and I that a critic is someone who is scared and hides. And is that the person that we want to take our life guidance from? Well, I'm not going to put myself out there because you just said I'm stupid and that my ideas are useless. Well, I don't know that a scared person who is only willing to hide is the wise sage that I want to take advice from. So let's take a look here. One negative comment simply says, "You're a jerk." Okay. I look, that person has 0 subscribers, 0 videos, 50 rows up in the stands. Next negative comment, talking about JP here. This guy has no clue what he's talking about. That person, 0 subscribers. So what that's telling us is these people are probably too scared to have their voice, because the degree that they criticize me or you or any other YouTuber out there is the degree that their inner critic would be pummeling the crap out of their own self if they stepped out of their own shadow and started letting their brilliance fly. There's always a correlation. The more our brilliance flies, the more criticism, both from internal and external sources, there will be. Last insight here is be your own warrior. The warrior spirit, let that live through you. And for me, what that means is when we're facing potential criticism, be afraid and go for it anyway. For me, a true warrior isn't someone who's fearless. To me, that's a false warrior who will only go places where he or she isn't afraid. They don't go into uncharted territory. For me, the true warrior is the person who is afraid and they keep going anyway. They appear fearless, but in fact, I think they're very intimate with their fears. They're not afraid to be afraid, and they're not controlled by their fears. Yet they are a human, so they do have fear. So for me, that's the call to action where you and I get to look at, yeah, I have an inner critic. There's external critics. And that criticism, it's kind of scary to receive. Yet we go for it anyway. We be ourselves, we express ourselves, we express our gifts, and we discover our gifts without apologizing for it. And yes, there's a time and a place to get compassionate and introspective and look at our inner critic and wonder, okay, how'd this part of me get here? And how does this part of me get served by criticizing? And when did I learn that? That's got its time and place. And here we're talking about the passionate ambition of being the warrior, being afraid, and going for it anyway. Personally, with where my ambitions take me, I get scared every day. And I'm very grateful that most of the time I keep going anyway. I kind of thank my inner warrior for that. And before we end this video together, I want to challenge you. I'd like to invite you to write something down that you've been holding back on out of fear of criticism. The invitation is write it down and take some sort of action on it right now. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me today. I personally think I needed to hear myself say all this today for my own benefit, and I hope you got something out of it too. And please be sure to subscribe to my channel, and I'm going to be looking forward to talking with you next time. In the meantime, as you effectively deal with criticism, enjoy how you allow yourself to shine on to greater degrees.